Hello, everybody, and welcome to our discussion on The Great Ordeal by R. Scott Bakker. I should have taken my book off the shelf, but
Here's mine.
there it is. Yes. And I'm joined here today by my dear friend, Philip Chase. So, hello, Philip. How are you?
Oh, Joanna, it is lovely to see you. I'm excited to talk about The Great Ordeal with you. I literally finished reading it about 5 minutes before I just saw you. So I
Oh,
have
my goodness. Five
lots of
minutes
thoughts.
before?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. Wow. I'm so
Nothing
excited to hear your
impressive.
thoughts on that. And I want to go ahead and admit that I might have betrayed Philip a little bit here because he did read on. I did get ahead of him a little bit, and then once I finished this book, I think you can understand why now, right? I mean,
Oh
with
yeah.
the way things end in The Great Ordeal, I felt like I had to read on. I couldn't just sit without knowing what was going to happen next. And the next thing I knew, I ended up reading the Unholy Consult. So
Well, you don't have any free will anyway, so you had
that's oh,
you had no choice in the matter, actually. Yeah.
thank you for reminding me. And that is actually a subject I really want to touch on. And before we get started, I'll go ahead and say here that we are going to go into full spoilers for The Great Ordeal, not going past that, though, of course. I'm going to try really hard not to showcase anything that comes after this book and not spoil Philip. But I also want to shout out, even though I don't think I've done so before, but I want to shout out the videos over on Slowly Read's channel, Mark from Slowly Read, because he did an incredible job of giving some spoiler thoughts on each of these books.
Mm.
And I'm just impressed with Mark's memory. I'm like, does he have some kind of photographic memory or an eidetic memory or something? Because
He's a Dunyan.
there you go. He's a Dun. That explains it. That explains it. Mark, the secret Dunyan.
Yeah.
So I want to shout out his videos because he did such an amazing job on this series when he read it and talked about it a few years ago. And the same with our good friend Jimmy from the Fantasy Network, who also had some wonderful spoiler discussions with Mark and Amanda from Shelf Unstabled. So just got to shout out, the darkness that comes before because they had some great insight. And we're just adding to the conversation here with our own experiences.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Excited to do it. So.
Yeah. So before we get into the meat of this book here, I want to go ahead and ask about this idea of free will. And we could bring up aspects of this book, by the way. But this is something I thought about a lot. I think even after our last discussion, I was thinking about this concept of the Dunyin and how they're able to understand people by studying the micro expressions of their face, by studying the logos, or studying whatever it is they have at their disposal to be able to pull the strings, if you will, to be puppet masters. And basically we're all doomed to follow this course of action. We're all doomed to follow this exact sequence of events. And if that's the case, how does that work with this idea that gets brought up over and over again in this book or in this series about how certainty is a myth, that there's no such thing as certainty,
Right.
and that humans are fools if they believe in such a notion?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that, Philip? I mean, these are just, I don't know, maybe they're not incongruent ideas, but to me, they feel slightly at odds with each other as I started to think more about this series.
Yeah, I would be very curious to hear Baker talk about this. And I think he does actually a pretty interesting job of balancing these two seemingly conflicting notions. But he captures, I think, the answer just in the phrase, the darkness that comes before. Now, the Dunyin think that through the logos, through their thousands of years of genetic engineering and everything else, that they can figure out how things work, and they're pretty good. You have to say they do marvels, things that mere mortals like ourselves would be incapable of doing, such as you said, understanding a person just through their facial expressions and their body language and everything else, and that's impressive. But as I think the survivor learns in this book, they're not perfect, and as much as they think they have mastered all of this, they actually are probably far more advanced than any of us, but they still can't explain everything. And there is this darkness that comes before. And the reason it's darkness is it's unfathomable for the human mind, perhaps. But that said, there is a greater cause behind us, behind everything we do. I think that there's no room for free will in this story. That there is we may not understand it completely. We may be incapable of understanding it completely. Some great combination of our biology and our society, our customs, our particular interactions. Basically, our lives are on this track that we're unaware of, we're ignorant of largely, but there are things that are pulling our strings all along. And if we had a sort of divine vantage point, we could see it all, but we don't. We're ignorant, and so it's darkness. Somebody like Kelhus, though, he knows that he has a greater amount of awareness. He's aware of the head on the pole behind him. There's a head on a pole behind him, and he knows it's there. Maybe he can't quite see the head exactly behind him, but he has a greater awareness of that head that is kind of dictating where he goes, in a sense. That he has a kind of madness about him that is a result of the amount of awareness that he does have. But he still doesn't know exactly. Like, he can't turn around and see that head straight on, can he? So, in other words, I think there's an extent to which the Dunyin do have a marvelous capacity to delve further than the rest of us, but they still can't see entirely through the darkness. They can't quite. They're human at the end of the day. There's still greater mysterious forces that, if we had a divine perspective, maybe we could figure. I don't know. What are your thoughts on all of that?
No, I think that that's really well said. I feel like it also reminds me, I know you've talked about this a few times on your channel too, about Sapolsky's Behave, that book. And I recently read his other book, Determined, which is the case for why we have no free will. And even though Sapolsky makes this case, he himself admits that he believes we have no free will, and yet he can't function longer than a few minutes at a time beyond the idea that we have that. So, like, for example, he's still going to act out as though we have choice, or still make judgments, or still react in certain situations as though we have free will. But I need to revisit the book, because there was one chapter where he talks about random events and how that doesn't necessarily preclude that there is no free will, and how people try to use that as a case against it, but it's actually not. I know I'm going a little bit, I'm digressing here a little bit, but yeah, I think that's an interesting point. And you brought up the head on the pole behind you. So I have to ask you, what are your thoughts about that line?
I mean, I don't know if that line comes up again. I'm assuming it probably does in the final book, in the Unholy Consult. It'd be a wild guess, but as far as I saw it in here, my interpretation, and it's pretty wide open. I don't know if Bakker has really spoken about it or not, but that's pretty much what I said is my interpretation of this, is that Kelhus is aware of what has come before him. You could interpret that head on the pole as many things. It could be his father, Moengus, for example. But I don't think that it's a symbol that doesn't have one definite, fixed interpretation. But it's valid to say, oh, well, you could say it's Moengus, maybe one way of looking at it, that his father laid out this path and determined the Kelhus's actions by preceding him, and eventually Kelhus, of course, as we know from the previous series, kills his father, or participates in the slaying of his father. Nair plays a role as well, but yeah, I think it's simply a symbol for the things that we're semi-aware of, or maybe not even, and those of us like mere mortals are probably very not aware of at all, the things that are controlling us. But it's interesting to me, because there was a moment in this where I thought, oh, is Bakker actually, what's he doing here? And that's it's late in here, but it's relevant to this issue of free will, so I'm going to bring it up. There's the moment when Memara forgives the survivor. And I found that to be such a poignant, maybe the most powerful moment in this entire book for me was that moment when she forgives. And I thought, oh my God, is Bakker actually suggesting that we have the capacity for compassion, and we can choose to, and then of course he has the survivor snort some Curie and jump over a cliff. I'm like, wait, I thought we were having a moment here, Bakker. What are you doing to me?
That was an interesting part too.
Yeah, it was really something.
Yeah,
And
go ahead. Sorry.
I mean, it's implied that she somehow knew that that would be the result after giving him the Curie. But in a way, okay, was this his moment of freedom though as well? Like it said that Dunyain can't possibly commit suicide, right? Did she free him to the degree where he was able to finally find that relief of annihilation? Because he tells the boy after she forgives him, after she forgives the survivor, the survivor tells the boy, his son, everything I taught you was a lie. Everything, that's all the ways of the Dunyain, all of this, everything I taught you was a lie. And that was the breaking of his whole worldview, the worldview that basically Kelhus is the embodiment of, right? And so if we know it's a lie, if the survivor has figured out it's a lie, where does it leave Kelhus,
Yes. It's so exciting to look at. As I recall too, he was also in that passage right before he jumped off or whatever, before he did that. He was part of his revelation was related to the Junyan of what you're talking about, was also that the logos was not a true measure of things. And I thought that was interesting. And it seemed like, unless I misunderstood, he might have made a distinction between the cause and the logos, which I'm not sure what that means. And I don't know. Your thoughts on the logos, by the way. I thought it was interesting to see this word in the Second Apocalypse series. Yeah. And then at the same time as I was reading the last book, actually, I was reading Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, Alan's favorite book. And there's a whole entire passage. Well, I mean, Marcus Aurelius talks about the logos all the time throughout his meditations. Follow the logos, the logos, the logos, the logos. And in the foreword of this book, it explains here that the Stoics designated the term logos. It says it has a semantic range so broad as to be almost untranslatable. Yeah. But at a basic level, it designates rational connected thought, whether envisioned as a characteristic, rationality, the ability to reason, or as the product of that characteristic, an intelligible utterance or a connected discourse. Logos operates both in individuals and the universe as a whole. In individuals, it is the faculty of reason. And it goes on to here, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here, but it says, all events are determined by the logos and follow an unbreakable chain of cause and effect. Stoicism is thus from the outset a deterministic system that appears to leave no room for human free will or moral responsibility. In reality, the Stoics were reluctant to accept such an arrangement and attempted to get around the difficulty by defining free will as a voluntary accommodation to what is in any case inevitable. Yeah, I found that really interesting to think about that.
It's very interesting, and I didn't realize I would be getting out my Bible when we started this, but that's it's a biblical word too. It's used, I think it's in John, the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and all that. That's logos as well, which is interesting to me because for Achamian and Mimara in that moment, so the survivor thinks of this logos or as this zero sum or whatever it might be. He has a more kind of rational attempt at explaining what this is, this great unknown, this sense of something that is beyond our ability to understand. And Achamian and Mimara name this God. They just call it God, right? That's what their way of explaining it to themselves is just God, right? So it's interesting to me that Bakker uses this word logos, which he would have been very aware of the biblical passage, and I'm pretty sure it's John that starts that way. In the beginning of the Word, in the beginning the Word already was. The Word was in God's presence, and what God was, the Word was. That's this particular translation. Yeah. he was with God at the beginning, and through him all things came to be. Without him, no created thing came into being. In him was life, and that life was the light of mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has never mastered it. So that's, I mean, Bakker would have been very aware of that passage when he did all of this. And it's interesting to me to conjecture. Of course, the word in the context of John, the Gospel of John, is obviously equated by Christians as Jesus, as Christ, right? As the light of the world and all of that. But what Bakker's doing with it is really interesting, and again, is God simply our way of explaining all that came before in a way that we're able to wrap our tiny little minds around, that there's no other way for us to completely reconcile ourselves. Just, we have to let go and say, well, it's just something way beyond us. It must be whatever you want to call it. But it's interesting to see how the survivor thinks of it in very still Dunyanian terms, I guess. Is this whole thing about zero and all of that? I don't really recall or understand entirely his line of thinking there. But it's the equivalent for him of God is something that he just can't quite understand. And in the moment where he realizes, and it's through Mimara's judging eye, which is the eye of God. It is this divine, view that allows her to see just how stained and sinned a person is, how damned we are, right? So the whole thing is really fascinating. But I think in the end, if I had a chance to ask Bakker, so this really means, right, that there's no free will, right? It's just that we can't understand, we'll never be able to understand entirely all the causality behind us because we're too puny, but it's there somewhere. And that also is a matter of faith, though, really believing that, okay, we can never understand it because our minds aren't capable of it, but there's all this causality behind us, that's making us what we are. Like the whole story of creation was, if you could have a divine viewpoint from the moment of the Big Bang, everything that followed of necessity, you could say, because of all the causality, if there's no free will whatsoever,
And that word necessity comes up a ton in this series, if you noticed. Yes, I love the way you put that, because that was something that I noted when I wrote down some thoughts about this. When I sat down to write like a general review, I don't publish my reviews, I just write them out for my own thoughts. And that was something that I thought about a lot, was about how this story explores what happens when people's faith turns in an opposite direction, whether they fully believe in something. And I feel like Proyas and Saban, they are two sides of the same coin, in my opinion, when it comes to believer, non-believer, and how in that way, like, can you ever really escape faith? Is that even possible? As much as people feel like they can be an atheist, for example, and like non-believer, can you really though? Like, can you really transcend that? I feel like this series is taking a scrutinizing look at that. And as well as that role, as you mentioned before, the role transcend the symbolic presence of father, like what a father means. I feel like that symbol is powerful. It's prevalent throughout the series as well.
Yeah. And it's something that Kelhos manipulates, knowing, right? He's very aware of being this big paternal figure, the emperor, the aspect emperor. He's like the father of the nation, or that kind of thing. And he deliberately uses that and manipulates that as part of the coldness of him. That's partly why I just don't like him very much, because of how manipulative he is. And there's this constant ongoing question of, I feel like a Kamian at moments, like, do I hate Kelhos, or do I actually kind of root for him because he is, in spite of the fact that he is what he is trying to save the world, I think.
It seems that way. Yeah, as I said before, I think in I think I made a mention of this in one of my previous videos about this series. I think when it came to the second book, The White Luck Warrior, about how there's that notion in fantasy. I feel like this comes up a lot in A Song of Ice and Fire, if I'm not mistaken, but it's that idea of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and finding allies through we have a common enemy. But this series takes that and it twists it, and it makes you question, but but is that my friend, or is the enemy the enemy? Is everything gets so turned around, especially in this particular book, I would say,
Yeah.
as
Oh,
far as what's true and what's not. And
Bakker is not a friend of certainty, and
no,
he leaves us
no,
sort of spinning a lot and wondering, okay, wait, am I? Is this what is going on here, or is this? And is this a position I'm being led toward, or, And he just has fun,
yeah.
leaving us uncertain at times. Thank you, Bakker.
And that's part of the fun of the series, I think.
Yeah, it really is.
I
Yeah.
mean, I feel like I finished the last book, like I said, and there are so many theories about so many things. So
Yeah.
it's a series that's leaving you to try to understand more, to evolve your thoughts about it. But yeah, let's go ahead and get into
Yeah.
more of scenes of the book, because I know people watching are probably like, when are you going to talk about Ishtarabent and about eating shrink and about the Narrander? So we're going to get into it a bit here. So
All the threads.
yes, yes. So thoughts about the opening of the book. I mean, we already talked about the head on the pole behind you as Kellis is manipulating Proyas, as he's basically breaking him. He's rearranging his thoughts that he built up about him being a savior. And meanwhile, men are eating shrink.
Yeah.
That was disgusting. But I would love your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I kept thinking of Bubba in Forrest Gump. You know, the guy who was he loves shrimp, and he would tell Forrest all the time about different ways you could cook shrimp. So he'd talk about shrimp fricassee, shrimp sandwich. And I was thinking stronk fricassee, stronk sandwich, and these guys are all eating these, stronk, coming up with new ways to cook stronk, sharing recipes.
So, fun fact about Philip and me, Philip is a vegetarian and
Yep.
I'm a vegan. And so, honestly, like reading those passages about cooking meat, of human meat, and the
Yeah.
taste of it, the primal feel of it, everything, I honestly started this book. I'll be honest. I started this book and I had to put it down after that chapter. And I read another book and then I picked it up again because
Yeah.
it it was so visceral. It was so primal and it was so gross. It was disgusting.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
just another thing that Baker is really good at is
oh yeah.
showing us our primalness, and the men on the Great Ordeal are basically not that different from Strong.
No, no, yes.
That's the interesting part, is that, you know, they're the horror, they're the monster because they eat people, and they like rutting and all of that, and here you have these men becoming more and more and more like their foe as they're devouring them. And it's the meat, Baker, he's so good at fixating on a certain word and repeating that word, and it just again and again, the meat, the meat, the meat, and it was just this very
It was
disgusting.
so well written. Like
Yeah.
the I'm saying that I put the book down because it was so effective. He
Yeah.
was so effective at getting a grossed out reaction from me, of
Yep.
getting under my skin with his words specifically. Like I felt it so deeply. And I also thought that specific idea about men eating shrink, what it took me back to was, I think the first book in Aspect Emperor, I think it's the judging eye, when the men of the ordeal are horrified by this idea that of killing the shrink. In a way, they feel kind of weird about it at first, remember?
Yeah.
And it was Sorwheel who says, no, these shrink are vile, they're vicious, they will eat humans and they will wear humans on their flesh. And he makes a case about how disgusting, immoral, and debased the shrink are. And this is the justification the men of the ordeal need. They need to hear this in order to have the guts to go forward with it. But now at this point,
I like the way you put that. Have the guts to go for it.
oh, word for there. Have the guts to gut the shrink and eat
Yeah.
the shrink. And
Yeah.
I mean, and we see at this point, they've fallen so low. They're no better than shrink.
That's right. And it's interesting because they now think of the Stronk as meat, and they're more like the Stronk, and therefore we also are just meat.
Yeah.
And
Oh, strong. I'm sorry if I mispronounced
oh no,
any of
I don't know
them.
if it's Strank or
You
Stronk.
might be right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, you might be right. So I have no idea. I mean, I don't think it really matters.
No.
But
Yeah.
so yeah, you say it however you like. I just keep saying Stronk in my head, so that's what comes out of my mouth. But anyway, yeah. I mean, it was. it was interesting to have that turned on you as a reader to realize, oh, we're strong too. Basically, we're meat, and not only are we the strong are basically libidinous and devouring, and they're just basically the most primal id form of the non-men, I guess. But they're really us too, aren't they? I mean, we're meat too, and we're predictable, and we have all these just automatic responses to stimuli, just like the strong. They swarm and they get into. So do people. Have you ever seen a crowd,
Oh,
act
yeah.
as a kind of as a single unit of insanity?
Mhm.
So what Bakker does again and again and again is he holds up this mirror and says, "Guess what? That's you."
Yes. We have such a hard time believing that about ourselves, but it's so true. Just to digress a little bit, that's why Pink Floyd's The Wall is it was one of my favorite movies growing up because it really shows a mirror to even people who love rock stars, how that emotional contagion can catch on and people can become a weird, I don't know, they could all be a hive mind of sorts and not know what they worship and do things without thinking about it, without having any sort of real deep moral feeling about it. So I think Baker did an incredible job with showing that through the Ordeal Men.
Yeah,
An amazing job with that. Yeah.
and poor
So
Proteus.
and poor Proyas, yes. So let's talk about Proyas
Yeah.
here because what did you what did you think when you saw that Kellis was revealing himself to be a false prophet?
Well, Kellis doesn't do anything without a purpose, and including he probably knew all along that eventually they were going to start eating strunk, and he knew what the effect would be on the men, and he was counting on that in order to use. That's the other thing about him. He may appear at times like a savior, but he also appears very calculating, very manipulative, very cold-hearted. And I feel like he's doing the same thing on an individual level with Proyas. That he's breaking Proyas and making him into something that he needs him to be at that particular moment for that particular contingency. So Proyas is, I mean, it's pretty awful, really. The way he treats Proyas is just horrible. He kind of rapes him, really. I mean,
Yes, yeah. I mean, and I think that's not a stretch to say, but I mean, in either way, he takes him, we'll say.
yeah, yeah, no, I mean, he's unmanning him because, of course, Price has grown up in this culture where the position that he finds himself in is not one that a manly man would be in, right? And he's taunted by Salbon constantly. Oh, you're weak, and they are two sides of a coin in a sense, because Salbon is much more cynical, who worships power, basically, whereas Proyas wants to have faith. He wants to believe in something divine, right? And he's given himself over to that. But why is Kelhus doing this to him? Why is he breaking him and making him into a different tool, I suppose? Whereas Salbon's end is really like, I kind of saw that coming. I didn't think Salbon was really going to live very long. Once that part of the story happened, that Salbon was like a weapon that Kelhus was pointing and did its job. And once it did its job, Kelhus was done with it. He says, basically, Kellis, he's like, oh, flee, everybody, bye, boing, and he winks out. And
Yeah.
yeah.
So, oh man, I have so many thoughts about that. I found it interesting that Kellis, his way of manipulating or changing Proyas was also by telling him that he says here the God is nothing human, like getting him to understand the God is nothing human.
Yes.
And what does that mean to somebody who's a believer, to somebody who um, yeah, for somebody like Kellis who just who wants to worship and have so much piety.
Proyas, yeah.
Proyas, I'm sorry, not to have any to understand the God as not human, how that changes his whole belief system and
Yeah.
how he reacts to things. It was just an interesting mode of operation with him because he's motivated so differently than Saban. If I'm saying that name right, I'm sorry. Is it Saban?
That's how I say it too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because if you look at human ideas about the divine through most of human history, gods or even the God is often basically a projection of ourselves, right?
Yes.
And that's kind of where Kelhus is trying to uh, disillusion Proyas and show him that all his ideas about God and faith and everything are all just almost childish, right? Is what he's doing to him, and turning him into more of a cynic, I suppose. But Proyas ends up being where Kelhus needed him to be at the end, and he's still alive, I assume, along with Caiutas, Kelhus' son, the
Mhm.
remnants of the Great Ordeal, the ones that didn't get nuked. Was that a nuclear bomb?
Yes, the
Yeah,
Incaroi object.
yeah. It's a
Yes,
nuclear bomb. Okay, yeah,
that caused the scalded. So they were basically poisoned by that bombing that happened.
yeah.
That particular, oh gosh, I guess we could pivot to that because wow, that scalded chapter. I honestly want to go back and reread it. I haven't yet, but
Yeah.
I want to go back and reread that whole chapter because it haunted me so much. There were two passages. I mentioned this in an earlier video that there were two passages or two parts in this book. I know we could talk about a ton more in this book, as we've
Oh,
already mentioned, that allude to biblical verse. But specifically, the scalded part, I mean, not only does that seem to align with nuclear weapons in our history, but it made me think a lot about, I don't know if it's biblical verse specifically, but passages about the weak and the hungry and how you need to care as a Christian for those people who are sick and weak, the lepers, if you will, and how the scalded are culled. Like, what kind of savior culls their weakest like that? I mean, it was haunting to me.
yeah, and how the one dude who had ridden ahead at one point during the Great Ordeal and had become, I don't know, zombified or whatever. I can't remember his name, but he and his horse riders had on a bet or something, essentially had ridden ahead and gotten surrounded in this haunted place, and even the Stronk won't go near them as they
Mhm.
go into battle and everything. But he's among the scalded, and he just wades into the water with everybody behind him,
Wow.
this figure of death and decay. And there's just, wow, there's a lot about this book that is so haunting.
Yeah.
But this guy has lost his humanity along with all of his other followers, and he's become a kind of a not the most popular guy in the Great Ordeal as a result, right? I mean, everybody just kind of avoids them, but they're still part of the Great Ordeal, and they play a role there. Just a sort of a bizarre one.
Yeah. I mean, it makes me think again about, I think in the judging eye, how, oh gosh, is it Cossiter? I cannot
Yes,
remember his name.
he's
Thank
the
you.
captain of the.
The captain. Yeah. How we get the whole entire backstory about how men are doomed to be, to go into factions, that
Yeah,
men are always doomed to divide. And that was something that I thought, like, okay, the Great Ordeal is divided. We're really starting to, we're still starting to fall apart. Things are starting to melt down. This is not good. Yeah. It was just it was chilling. The other part that made me think a lot about biblical verse, one that many people have redefined or recontextualized, and understandably so, is the part where Mimara is reflecting on the whales, or the mar whales, if they're, I think is what's it called, when
yeah,
they're in the mines, when they're in the Dunyan mines, and she's seeing how damned and how horrible the Dunyan were, the true evil of the Dunyan in her eye.
they did to the females
They
among them.
get to the females, yes.
Yeah, yeah,
And how that is a reflection to her of how women are perceived as being the weaker sex. It was
yeah.
a hard verse to read, honestly. I had a really hard time with that part of the book.
They had this very utilitarian approach to life, and that reduces everything to its utility. And for them, in their very flawed way, they had come to the conclusion that women were as more effective to be turned into these essentially vessels of that incubators, I guess, essentially is what they were. And Mimara sees the horror of this, the inhumanity of it, and realizing that this is where Calhus comes from, this horror, this monstrous way of seeing life. this emotionless, utilitarian view, and yeah, I mean, it's hard to say what's more horrible, really, the Dunyain or the in Chorai or in Korai, or however you say that, or the non-men, what they've become. We have to talk about that too. Ishtarabinth being almost a subversion or even a mockery of a lot of Tolkienian things. But
it really disturbed me though, because when she witnesses all this and she has that memory and puts all these things together in her head, it says that she reflects that women possess the lesser soul. So that's what I mean by, I think there's some Old Testament verse, from what I understand, that women are the weaker vessel, that a lot of Christians no longer, I think they recontextualize it, or they don't see it that way anymore, from what I understand. I don't know. A lot of updates to that idea, I guess. But
no, it's there. It's there. You'll find verses in the Hebrew scriptures and also in the Gospels, particularly in the letters of Paul, that refer to women as being beneath men, that men are closer to God, and that God is the head of the men, and the women, and men are the head of the women. So yeah, that's unfortunately present.
It's just so disturbing. So those were the two passages I think that in some ways disturbed me the most out of the whole entire book, honestly.
That's horrific. That's a horror show, what these people made themselves into by following this path. But it didn't work out for them very well, did it? They were overwhelmed, and they realized that it's interesting how Bakker uses sorcery as well. And the idea of the divine in here, the sorcery is this loose cannon, I guess you could say, because the Dunyain hadn't accounted for it. They had a weakness, which was that they were susceptible to the sorcery of the non-men who came doing the bidding, I suppose, of the Inchorai or whoever's still around in what's the place called where everybody's trying to go here? Golgotharath, right? Golgotharath, which again has very almost sounds very biblical as well.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah, he did an incredible job with some of the names. Yeah, the Ishtarabinth. Is it Ishtarabinth? No, wait.
Yep, Ishtarabinth. Yeah.
Is that
That's the non-men place.
Oh, okay, the non-men place, but the Ishual labyrinth halls. Sorry.
Oh yeah, Ishual is the Dunyain place.
The Dunyain halls. Well, I think actually in both locations, I feel as though Bakker does such an incredible job with just like the dark halls and the judging eye. He does such a good job of just creating the darkest, deepest atmospheres, and then revealing the darkest truths within those locations, within those settings.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm sure he does that intentionally, but it's there's always something revealed there, kind of like the human subconscious, like the darker parts of our unconscious mind. When we dig there deep enough, we might find things that are uncomfortable to see sometimes.
Oh my goodness. I mean, and he does skillfully use other texts to lend even more atmosphere, even as he subverts those texts. And I mentioned Tolkien a moment ago, and Ishtarabinth. We had the earlier parts where it felt like we were in the mines of Moria, but it was very subverted. And this time again, there were some reminders of that with the Nimel, which is basically Mithril in this world, and that was a big part of Ishtarabinth as well. But the non-men are basically Bakker's elves, right? We don't have the equivalent of dwarves here. So he assigns a lot of this to the elves. And we even get some warped hobbits in here. Sadly, the Emwamwe.
Yeah. How do you say that? I always forget. I'm sorry, but yes.
They're called. I think in one place he even calls them halflings, which is really sad.
That is wild. And we also have giants, or the remnants of giants in the Weeping Mountain.
Yep.
At the bottom. So let's go ahead and talk about that, the Ishtarabinth chapter. I know we're kind of just jumping around, but we could always jump back if we need to.
Oh, yeah.
Ishtarabinth chapter and Sorwheel's journey.
Yes. Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yes.
Bakker very effectively draws from not just Tolkien, but older mythology here. You have an episode with Sorwheel essentially being ferried by a psychopomp, an individual who brings the dead across the river. He even refers to this place as Stygian, which is the adjective for the river Styx. So it's very clear that he's drawing from these older mythologies.
I think Jenny Wirtz uses that word too, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, it can mean just dark, but
dark,
obviously,
I guess, black, or yeah.
The river Styx, which is the river you cross when you go over to Hades, right? I think that's how it works. But anyway, you have a psychopomp leading you across there, and you have this old warrior, the saggy, wrinkly old warrior non-man who is the ferryman that brings not just Sorwheel, but also the last sane non-man there is the young fellow. I can't remember.
Is it Oinerol? Is that the one you're talking about?
Yes, yeah. yes. They go on this journey that is very reminiscent of crossing the river. There is a body of water there, and they visit essentially a kind of Hades. It's a little bit like Odysseus in the Odyssey, going to see Tiresias, right? Tiresias is this ancient prophet that he wants to consult in order to find out what's going on, right? Only they want to go down there to wake up Oinarl's father.
Yes.
They can bring about, and I think Oinarl knew the whole time this was a suicide mission for him.
Yes. And so we learned that about the non-men, that they cannot die by suicide.
Yeah.
So this could be a means to do that, a secondary means to do that. I guess, and they also, sadly, that I think that's actually the way that they're cursed in a way, right? That they can't die.
The deal they made with the Inchori was that they got eternal life, but then all the females among them died, and they lived this horrible existence. And it's like, again, Bakker does this thing where elves in Tolkien are immortal, and they're beautiful, and they have nice pointy ears, and these elves are sad and crazy, and they want to die, but they can't because they're so just, oh my goodness. So yeah, I think it's the idea of immortality is a sickness here. It's shown just how crazy it is, how mad it is to want to live forever, and they even get to a point where their insanity, it appears to us to be insanity, but they get to a point where if they love someone, they have this incredible urge to kill them, which is what happens to Oinarl. His father, wham, kills him as soon as he sees him, and feels terrible about it. But then that's release for Oinarl. And then,
what a cursed people! My goodness,
it doesn't get crazier than this. It really,
I mean, it's a dark world too, where absolution or complete, as I understand, absolution, just complete darkness, death beyond death, is the better option for anyone.
Yeah. This is why mortality is a blessing, actually.
Yeah,
think of it that way.
That's how it is in this world for sure. In fact, there was a passage, I know I'm jumping around a little bit. We could stay in the Shturabinth after this, but there's a passage that I want to say that Kamian tells Mimara about how if a soul is twice damned, how they're in deeper trouble than ever. And then there's a passage where I want to say that Kellis tells Proyas that Serwa her soul is damned, that she's in eternal damnation or something. I found that so sad when he said that, like, poor Serwa, poor real Serwa.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just one of the crazier among many crazy episodes is Sorwheel's journey in this. And of course you get shorter snippets of Serwa, who is again, there's a lot of sexual assault and rape and horrible things in here. And she's, of course, gotten in this Zen state where she's beyond her own body. And so she's not feeling the torture. And she seems to be able to master her torturer, in a sense, by singing and reminding them of the women that they lost. But ultimately, she does pretty much get trussed up. And if it hadn't been for Sorwheel, they would have been dead, and he comes arriving with Oinarl's father. And eventually he's deposited next to Serwa and takes the cloth out of her mouth and says, "Sing," and you can
Yes.
imagine what happens after that.
That was incredible. I thought that was
That was
incredible.
crazy and incredible. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I loved it. It was a bit of one of those triumphant moments that happens.
I mean, it was a relief. I'm not a Sarah. That's the thing about Bakker. Okay, I'm gonna have a little mini rant here. I don't love any of these characters because they're so damaged and they're so cruel. Like Sarah, of course I didn't want her to be going through all that. Of course I wanted her to get free. And of course it was a huge relief to me when he took the cloth out of her mouth and said, "Sing." But she's also a really mean person, and she's like her father, manipulative and maybe less so to a degree because she has some of her mother in her, I think. I think there is some of Esmenet in Sarah, and that makes me like her a little more. But at the same time, this is the thing about Baker's characters where I think my emotional investment is not as great as it could be because like these people are so mean and horrible or sad. It's hard to get behind them.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but they're fascinating and they're in their brokenness and everything else.
Yeah. Yeah, we do. And we get some interesting passages from Sarah remembering her mother and then also thinking about her father. And she reveres her father.
Yes.
And she seems to be an important player for her father, too.
But he used her.
Yeah. And she knows it, too.
He put her there. Yes. He knew
Yeah.
what was going to happen to her.
Mhm. That's awful. Yeah.
That's
He's the worst.
cold. Yeah.
Yeah, I know it's awful. But I don't know. I still love the way all of that happened, like how she was able to use her voice, how they were able to escape. And by the way, that's not the only time that singing is used in this book, which I thought was cool because the nuns sing at a certain stage with the ordeal and Kellis sings. So a lot of singing magic going on, kind of dark singing magic, I would say. But yeah, absolutely bonkers.
This is a bonkers book. It really is.
It is. It is. I would love, since we're talking about Sarah and talking about her relationship, father-daughter and mother-daughter relationship.
Yeah.
We go back to Momin now and talk a little bit about, Esmenet Thelopi, however you say her name, Theli. I like to just call her Theli, but Theliopa.
Oh, yeah. Theliopa, is it?
Yeah, that's probably right.
Yeah.
Theliopa.
Yeah.
I loved, so I was very sad that we got her death in this book.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah.
Didn't we? Or am I reading on?
Oh, no. Theli dies in the earthquake.
Okay, thank goodness. I'm like, I didn't spoil something for
No. She dies in the earthquake, and that's after the White Luck Warrior lures her to her place of death, and she's kind of like aware, I guess you could say.
Very.
She's not
so smart. Yes.
Yeah, she's very smart. She shows some vulnerability where this is going to sound awful that I would actually. I'm not rooting for a little boy to die, so I don't want to sound like that. But my least favorite character in this entire thing, almost the little. I mean, that's
intentional, though, Philip. I think.
I know. But still, anyway, he does show us that Theli has some real vulnerability. That the older brother, the one who was already dead, that was killed by Mathanet, that he did something. He was cruel to her, as he seemed to be to everyone else. That he probably, it's not clear because Kalmomus asks her, well, again, there's a lot of sexual assault and rape and stuff like that. Or were you actually seduced, and she doesn't answer the question. She runs away, showing the most emotion we see out of her.
Yeah.
So yeah, she's a kind of sort of pathetic character, I guess, in the sense that I feel bad for her, but at the same time, she's so robotic and everything that I mean, there's something there. There's some of her mother in her as well as her father. Again, it's just harder for her to show it, and the fact that she makes her own dresses and that they're also outlandish.
It does. It sounds like something that comes out of the Hunger Games, or I don't know, just some other fantasy world. the way that they
She's
describe
a
that.
quirky one. She's an
Yeah.
eccentric character, but it is sad that she does perish, and it's part of the, I guess, uh, the what's the goddess's name that's out to get Kelhus?
Yatwer.
Yatwer. Yes, it's
Mhm.
part of Yatwer's plan is eliminating Kelhus's progeny because they are his support. I guess you could say in a way they're his support staff. In order to make him as vulnerable as possible. But
Yes. Yes. Oh, that reminds me of some questions I had about Yatwer, which I'll put a pin on. But for Thelopia, or I'll just call her Theli because I'm sure I'm
that's
mispronouncing her
easier.
name. I I was pretty upset. I love what you were saying. We do see her vulnerability. It was heartbreaking, her vulnerability in that moment.
It was. It really
In some
was.
ways, I I kind of wish Baker hadn't gone there, like that he had to make that part of her journey in a way because I just. But at the same time, I have to say that I think of all the kids, in a way, she seems to be the smartest. There's a line in which Caius tells Proyas that as kids, they were all trying to figure out their father, that they didn't quite understand who Kellus was. And I wrote this down, and that he says, there is no such man as Nassarimber Kellis, no such prophet, only an intricate web of deceptions and stratagems,
Yeah.
bound by one inexorable, and as you know, quite ruthless principle. And he says that Theli was the first one to figure it out, that there is no one there, that it,
Right.
and so she seems to be, in some ways, the brightest of all of them. And I was so impressed with her character, especially early on in the story, the way she really takes charge. And you do question, does she even have feelings? Does she? Maybe that scene was important as much as I was heartbroken that she had to go through that with her brother, or, in her backstory, as heartbreaking as that
Really
was.
tough.
I
Yeah.
think it is important that we did see that she does have emotions, that she can be vulnerable, and that's
Yes.
something I think we can see in some of the Dunyan children at times, specifically, yeah, her and Serway at times. But with Deli, some of the things that I noted that I was really impressed with early on in the story was how she approaches Esmenet, and she says, "You need to kill Nari." Like, she advises her mother to kill Nari, which is a pretty cold-blooded thing to do.
Yeah.
She's thinking ahead. She's thinking about her mother and the safety of the kingdom, the safety of Momin, and she knows that this is what Esmenet needs to do. That she's going to be screwed over if she doesn't kill Nari. And so I think that was correct advisement, as awful as it was. And then the second thing was confronting Kelmomus and saying, "Uncle told me everything." I mean, she's not afraid to see him head on and tell him straight on. And I think at one point she even sees that he has his brother in him, right?
Oh, she sees right to the heart of him. Yeah, and it
Yeah.
terrifies Kelmomus.
Wow.
Terrifies the little jerk.
I mean, it was impressive, though, because he is terrifying. He's probably the most terrifying character in the whole series in some ways. And the way that she was able to just look him straight in the eyes and tell him, I know what you've done. I
Yeah.
know that you killed our uncle. Like, knowing that he killed Mathanet and being able to face him head on and
And
tell
his
him, I
twin.
mean,
And his twin as well. I know
that
what you
was
did.
bold. That was really, really bold. And she
Yeah.
explains that the only reason that she's not telling mom is because we need the capital needs its empress, that we're going to be vulnerable without our mom, and it's going to break mom's heart to know what you really are. So I
Yeah.
found that was incredibly skillful on her part, that she was able to calculate her ability to do that and to be so bold. And then also the scene when Esmenet uses the Kore against the skin spy.
Yeah.
That in that scene, I mean, Esmenet's very vulnerable, and we get that sense. It doesn't matter how. I think we get the sense of, just because she's in a powerful position, and Kelmomus notes this at one point, just because his mother has the seat of power doesn't make her any less vulnerable.
Right.
But it's in that scene. It could have been a missed opportunity if Theli hadn't shouted, that our mother, she saved us, like shouting out that Esmenet is the heroine. She's the one who saves us. I think that was also a
Oh,
skillful.
it was a strategy. Yeah.
He was so smart. So after noting these aspects of Theli's character and these strategies, I was thinking, wow, she is so wicked smart. And at the same time, is she doing this out of any sort of real love or concern? But like
Yeah.
I said, as much as I hate that part of her backstory, that has to be a part of her story, I do think it's important in showcasing, like I said, that she can be vulnerable, that she isn't totally unfeeling, that there is emotion there.
Yes, I agree. It's just every single one of these kids is broken, and they're broken in different ways. You had Inrilitas, who was clearly
Oh, yeah.
insane and cruel. And it's sad to me that these kids who are so perceptive, why are they all, half of them are sociopaths, right? As a result of being so perceptive and being able to manipulate others, it doesn't follow necessarily that you're going to be a sociopath just because you have the ability to see behind people's emotions and facial expressions and everything else. So some of them are worse than others, and Realitas has to be chained up because of how bad he is. Kalmomas is a monster, and although one who he keeps getting frustrated at the same time, though, we'll get to that scene, I'm sure, but he wanted his father to die, and his little interference there in that moment is what caused that, probably saved Kellis from the White Luck Warrior.
Yes, let's talk about it. Yeah.
And then he realized, oh wait, I just screwed everything up here, But Kalmomas is just such a horrible character. This is every Kalmomas POV is like, I'm cringing. I'm like, I do not like this kid. And it is sad to me, though. At the same time, though, they do have some of their mother to some degree. Like, Kelmomas doesn't seem to have much of her. He just simply lusts after her. He wants her for himself. He wants to bask in her. He doesn't have her compassion, though. He doesn't have her empathy. And others do. You see it in Theli, despite her seeming to be robotic. It's there. I think you do see it in Serwa. I think you could probably have seen it in Samarmas before he was killed by his brother. But it's fascinating to me that that what might be viewed as the weaker side of these kids, the Esmonite side, not the Kelhus side, is actually the side that, in the end, I think is the more could be the side that makes me have some faith in humanity, I suppose. Esmonite is also a very broken, troubled, difficult character in many ways, and maybe the one character I'm most sympathetic toward. I don't know. There are a few. There's the Dunyan kid who's missing a couple fingers. I feel bad for him. I feel bad for Esmonite all the time because of the hand she was dealt. Mimara as well, I think. But yeah, I mean, Esmonite is an interesting character, and her being an ordinary person, but somehow a fit vessel for Kelhus, who's been using her this whole time. And her heroism, her being lost, her being so hurt and trying not to be hurt all this time, and being continuously reminded of her past, and her relationship, her broken relationship with all these messed up kids that she's trying to see them as kids, and the horrific moment when she sees Kelmomas when Theli has died, and she's leaning over her broken daughter, and she sees in a reflection. Kelmomas doesn't realize that she can see his reflection. He's like, he, and she sees him and then realizes, oh, you little Dunyan sucker, you. And realizes what he is, and then he runs away, realizing, oops, I messed up,
Yeah. Yeah, it's so heartbreaking because you can understand why Theli kept that from Esmonite. I mean, I think she has some idea that, I mean, fortunately, she did remember, I think at the beginning of the book, that Maithanet told her that Kelmomas is not what he seems. So there was that planted in her mind early on.
But she didn't want to believe it.
No, not at all. And who would? I mean, it's just, I feel so sad for her.
She needed that one little solace, that place where her motherly love could be pure,
Yes.
And
that is the desire.
Theli understood that.
Yes. Yes. Now, Cayutas is one that I have a harder time warming up to. He's not a character that I felt any softening towards whatsoever.
Yeah, he has pretty clear Dunyan abilities. He can learn languages like that, and he seems to be just a kind of a the Walmart version of his father.
The Walmart version of his father.
He's not Kellis, and he doesn't have the magic either, right?
Mm-hmm.
The sorcery. He's not a like Serwa. To me, Serwa is actually the most formidable of them all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And interesting in a way. And her whole relationship with Moengus as well, and with Sorwheel.
Mm. Yeah.
Yes, it's part of it. It's her mission to get Sorwheel to hate her, and so that he will be a true enemy of the Anasarimber, because that's the deal, right? They made this deal that to be hostages over in Ishtarabinth, there had to be one daughter, one son, and one enemy. And so she has to make an enemy of him on the way, and she's frustrated because she's doing all these things and he still loves her. And part of that is she can't perceive, because he's been smeared by the goddess, by Yatwer. Is he able to fool? I don't know. See, one question I had is way back when Kelhus saw him and said, "Oh, you're one of the Believer Kings. Good, you're on board." He thinks that the goddess hid his true intentions. He thinks that Yatwer fooled Kelhus because she smeared him through that poor Sporian guy, smeared him with the clay and everything, and that disguised him. Did Kelhus actually know?
That's what's so hard to understand.
Right? Was he actually not fooled, and he understood exactly what Sorwheel was and what he would do, and that he would play a vital role in the end? Or was he just lucky that Sorwheel played that role in the end and was able to help free Serwa and accomplish seemingly what that was, I assume, to be the goal, was that Kelhus knew that the non-men were treacherous. He had to have known that Nilgicus wasn't there, because Nilgicus was working with the captain. What's his name?
Yes.
That you mentioned
Yes. Yes, I know you're talking about
Cossiter, right?
yes.
So Nilgicus had been working with Cossiter all that time, and Cossiter was working for Kelhus in order to lead Acamian along.
Oh, that is so okay.
So he knew that Nilgicus wasn't there. He knew that. He had to have known, because
I can't remember if I knew that he knew that.
He had to, because Cossiter was working for Kelhus, right?
That makes perfect sense, though. But
Cossiter never would have said, "Oh, by the way, there's this non-man. I don't know who he is, but he's working with me," And Kelhus would have known that was Nilgicus, I'm sure.
That is so clever.
So he put his poor kids and Sorwheel into this trap, but maybe understanding that Sorwheel would play a key role in actually helping Sarah accomplish her mission, which is presumably to destroy an ally of Golgothareth.
Yes. Yes. So that was all planted. I think there is even a passage from Sarah's perspective where she is reflecting on a conversation she has with Kelly.
As she's imprisoned. Yeah.
Yes. And about how the Niam, however you say that.
This agreement.
That agreement. Yeah. It was all kind of a trick or trap in some ways. And that she was it was kind of like bait, I suppose. And then she was going to use her power to overpower things. But how could they know that everything was going to work out the way it did with Sorwheel? That's where I'm lost. Yeah. Because obviously, she did what she needed to do.
Right.
But she didn't know about Yatwer, and we don't know if Kellis knows about Yatwer. And then, but at the end, it kind of worked out in Kellis's favor and their favor, because when he's at the bottom of the Weeping Mountain, he has this whole revelation about, or understanding. He gets this whole entire understanding through Oineral and through the Amurlus, how we say that, the helmet thing.
The special helmet. Yeah.
The special helmet. I don't know. He starts to get a greater understanding of what happened to Nilgicus, and then understands Kelhus to be the one savior, the one way out. Remember? So it's just weird the way that all. Did he know? Did he know that was all going to work out?
That's the thing. I mean, Kelhus is the big mystery in this still, because there are moments when you feel his mortality, when you think, oh yeah, he's just a very, very perceptive, very capable, but ultimately still mortal. Like that part where he rushes back, obviously, from the Great Ordeal to Momen to salvage what he can of the Empire, and he combats the snaky guy, whatever they're called, the water, the blind ones. That he's the last of them, Sishawarim.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So the last, he combats him, and he kills the what's her name, the priest.
Nafaran.
Yes.
The letters get all jumbled in my head.
She's Yatware's priestess or whatever.
Yes.
So he gets rid of them, and then finally he turns on this emissary from Zeum. Is it? No, not Zeum. Where the heck is the guy from? One of the neighboring territories. Anyway, you know what I'm talking about, right? The emissary who's been sent there to decide whether or not they're going to ally with. Now, nominally, they're already allied with the Aspect Empire, but he's doing a little double deal behind the scenes, and his king has sent him to see if they want to actually ally with what's his name? You know who I'm talking about, right? The emissary. Oh, there's too many names here.
I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, that's okay. But anyway, this guy is about to get his head chopped off by Kelhus, and Kelhus, he says, what are you?" And Kelhus just answers, "Weary." He just says, "Weary."
Right. Are you talking about Maluebi or?
Yes, that's Webby or whatever.
Yeah.
He says, "What are you?" And he says, "Weary." You know,
oh my God.
No God is going to answer with that, right? Yeah. So.
And then he takes his head and
sticks one of his demon heads on him and says, "Go kill your king." You know, weird. I don't know what.
Weird part. That was a really weird, surreal.
Yes.
Part. There was something about Kelhus and a chalice that was a little bit odd. I don't know if you remember that, the chalice reference. And then,
I mean, there was a thing that Memwebby or whatever his name is was using as a shield, I think, and he had this little object that he was holding that was part of this spell that was allowing him to not get killed there. But yeah, it was trippy. It was real. I kind of, there were definitely a few moments where I was asking myself, was Bakker on something when he wrote this?
Yeah. Sometimes the way that Bakker writes certain descriptions to me gets a little more abstract in my head. Like I get lost. Yeah. I'm not sure if I follow everything he's trying to describe.
Yeah.
And that particular scene was also all the more strange because the way it's written towards the end, it makes it sound like Kelhus. I don't know. Did you get this impression? I felt like as a reader, like Kelhus was two places at once. Like and he's in Moment, like with Esmenet, when the earthquake happens. I'm like, what? How's he two places at once?
Well, he has the ability to travel really fast. He does appear to be kind of exhausted when he arrives, and a little disarrayed. So, yeah, he has vulnerabilities there, and you think that he's about to bite it when when Yatware's White Luck Warrior is there, and he sees the vision of how it's all going to happen. And we see the sword go through his, the core eye just grazes him, and then the sword goes through his neck, and that was not what happened because that little jerk said, "Mommy." This is the craziest thing. And then I'm not sure why, but suddenly blood is coming out of the White Luck Warrior's ears. Did Kelhus do something to him? But he gets squished anyway in the earthquake. And that's that. And Kelhus, is still alive and kicking.
That's right. That's right.
Crazy stuff.
That is the wildest ending.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the reason I felt like I had to read on right away. I just couldn't.
Oh, I get it. I found this book to be exhausting in a way, actually. Like it's just relentlessly bleak and brilliantly written. And I mean, there's just it revels in the disgust and in the primal, just horrific vision of humanity that we just get page after page of this, and it's brilliant and amazing, but I found it exhausting at the same time.
Yeah.
I don't know. It was like, it was just relentlessly bleak. It's
It
kind of
is.
like you'll read some books that, let's say an author does action really well, right? And they realize it, but then they just make a whole book. It's just action, 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 action. You're like, after a while, you're like, okay, you need some peaks and valleys here. You need something different. You need some quiet moments, And I felt like this book was just horror and more horror and more horror. And I just couldn't,
Yeah.
relax for a moment while reading this.
I can understand that. I did feel like it was a bit of a slow burn for me in the sense that it was so much, like so much of that. I don't think slow burn's even the right word, but I like it could be feel a little exhausting after a while with
Yeah.
how much battle and how much debased, degenerate
Blood and
behavior
guts,
and yeah.
viscera and poop and larva and just,
And shame and guilt and
yeah. Lack of
destruction
compassion,
and
and then Nair shows up
yeah.
being all Nair-like.
Not to mention all of the history and all of the lore that gets brought up. There was so much to absorb, like so much about like the vial, for example, and
Yeah.
uh, all the non-man history. It's a
Oh
very
my
dense
goodness.
book.
When we were in Ishtarabinth, it was like name after name, and I was like,
Mhm.
I don't know who any of these people are. I'm
Yeah,
lost as can be. I just had to grasp any name I could finally, and I finally could remember the guy that Sorreal was with. I was like, okay, I remember this guy.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It got a bit abstract at times,
Very
and
much
got
so.
hard to follow. But I think what helped carry me through, even though I appreciate all that stuff, I do appreciate that his use of adding all those elements, even if I can't take it all in or absorb it all in as a first time reader or whatever. I do think it paints a very, I don't know, it gives a lot of dimension to the world and to the atmosphere, if nothing else,
Yeah.
and it adds weight to the stakes. But for me, I think that what helped carry me through all of it were the moments with the characters in Ishtarabinth when they get out, like the whole entire scene that comes down when Sarah gets her mouth ungagged, when she's able to sing, when they're able to escape, and also just the character intersections. So when Kellis and Esmenet, I think that that's the first time in Aspect Emperor when they're together in a scene. If I'm not, no, I guess they were together
No,
in earlier
it
books.
happened earlier too,
It
but
did
it's
happen
rare.
earlier, but it's been a while, so it took a long while, and just to have this strange family reunion at the craziest moment with the earthquake happening.
And he
It
asks
was
her, "What have you done?" What?
yeah, 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 that was oh, goodness. I
Yeah.
love Esmenet's character, so I was so nervous for her in that moment. But, yeah, it's those moments that I think carried me through the story, and I'm also just I've been throughout the Aspect Emperor fascinated by Sorbeel's storyline. I think that he showcases a very human storyline. He has very deep conflicts, especially as he doesn't necessarily want to be used as a tool for Yatwer, and at the same time, his loyalties are being divided. He's being thrown around quite a bit. So I enjoyed his storyline quite a bit. Um, there's just a lot there, though. There's a lot to unpack in
There's
this
so
book.
much. And of course, the return. Now, I was expecting this to happen, the return of Nair. I didn't know.
Yes.
I didn't know when it was going to happen, but I expected it fully, and so I was kind of, I was gloating a little when he showed up, and thinking, "Yep, I knew that you were going to do that, Baker." Now, I have not read the last book, so I'm in a bit of a mystery here in the moment, wondering, okay, whose side is Nair going to be on? Is Nair going to help the consult? He's got his sort of her Serway lookalike there with him, who's seemingly a representative of the consult, right? And a skin spy, right? Who's taken this form, and at the same time, Nair doesn't want to be anybody's dupe. He doesn't want to be anybody's tool, right? He wants to call his own shots. That whole exchange between him and Akamian, whoa, was that tense, right? I mean,
Yes.
Akamian and finally realizes who else is there, and realizes first of all that Mimara is who she is. Oh yeah, you do look like Esmond, don't you? Yeah, and he's very perceptive. And then he sees the boy, and Mimara's like, "Run!" You know, she can't say it out loud, but he, of course, being a Dunyan, the boy picks up, "You better run," and he runs. You know, and I hope that he really did escape. Apparently, he threw a rock at Sarway lookalike there, and was able to escape. But man, was that tense, that whole scene there. And there's just so much insanity and power in that scene, as in much of this book. There's so much power and insanity in this book.
Yeah, that was just another powerful, exciting character intersection that, again, like those moments just
little reunion.
got me so excited. They were exciting. Yeah.
At
Yeah.
the same time, it does remind one of how we follow these patterns. Like we find ourselves back with these characters together in a way that reminds us of the past, and we remember we're basically the puppets of what comes before, you know. And this feels like, wow, or we're just kind of going on this track, you know, that has been dictated for us. So it'll be interesting though, because Nair is a bit of a loose cannon here in all of this, I think. So it'll be interesting, you know, obviously, I think, by having read the last book, but I'm wondering, okay, what is Nair going to do at this point? But that's an interesting thing to throw in. Good timing, Bakker.
I'm so excited for our next discussion. There's going to be a lot to unpack in that. Yeah.
Yep.
Do you feel like we did pretty well? Is there anything else you wanted to bring up that?
I'm sure we missed stuff, but you know, this was just what came out of us. But
yeah. And yeah, I'm sorry that we're not getting to every detail, but that's never really the goal for me. I feel like that's almost an impossible feat when it comes to a book by Bakker or like a book by Erickson or Wirtz. I think you're just going to have to leave some stuff off. And I'm sure later on I'll be I'll be lamenting the fact I didn't bring this up. I forgot to bring this up, but you know, that's what the comment section is for. So if anybody wants to jump in with any moments we missed that you want to talk about or unpack for us or add to with what we said, of course, no spoilers for the last book, as Philip hasn't read it, but I know that we're both eager to hear your comments in the comment section below.
Yeah, very good. Thank you so much, Joanna, for not only hosting this, but going through this. It's good to have somebody going through the darkness with you on this crazy journey. So I'm glad that I get to talk about it with
you. The pleasure's all mine. I just appreciate your insights so much, Philip. So thank you so much for taking the time to read this with me and talk about it.
Pleasure.
All right. And thank you all so much, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.